Hello, today we're going to talk to you about a 2004 with a 96 4.0 push rod engine and how to put it in. You want to save the engine mounts to the to the block from the 04, the crank sensor from the 04, the EGR and the pickup tube from the 04, so it can plug back in and fly by wire, and then the pickup for the PCV valve is back here with the 2-wire plug-in is still in there on the 96. And then we have a fuel pressure regulator with the electronic fuel pressure regulator, so I can adjust it up to 70 pounds of fuel pressure. And then on the heat sensor, or the temperature gauge, because on this year on the 96 came with 2 of them. All you need is the one with the electronic on the electronic side, so it plugs back in on the with the 2 wires down there, because everything's right off of the electronic. You don't need the other one hooked up. And when you undo the wire harness, it's in a wire. It's back there wrapped up. You got to unravel it, bring it where you want it. And I had to re-tube all the seals, or rewrap all the wires, reseal everything, and the throttle plate is off the 04 fly-by-wire, so everything's plugged back in. I had to cut the bolts in with the paper gasket, mark them, and drill the holes out so everything would bolt back on. This has a rubber gasket in there with the paper gasket, so I just left the rubber in there and sealed it back up. Then plugged up the hole for the old return for the idle sensor, got rid of it for the vacuum lines for everything, and the old fuel pressure regulator is still hooked up mechanically with the vacuum line as well as the electronic one. And then on the 96 from here, plugged in with the 04 cut with a tube in there so it doesn't leak, with the 04 computer board and everything's all 04. And then I cut a notch out here for the AC line, or for the AC pump, cut it back in there on a grinder so everything would plug back in. And then I cut 2 wires here for the AC pump, redid them up. And the wire in the back for the cam sensor is redone from a 3 cap to a 2 cap with the screws from a 3 cap, so it screws back in. Cut the wire in the back for the cam sensor, resolder them and clip the cap back on. Those are the only 3 wires that have been cut. Everything else would plug right back in, and the oil sending unit is off the 04 too. The crank sensor, motor mounts. As long as you got the flywheel, everything else will bolt right back in. Now on these flywheels, they have an extra bolt on the bell housing. You don't need it, but you need all the other ones. The starters are the same. For all the way from 95 and down, they use the same starter. So the 04 is wired onto still in line with the original 04 computer board and the bell housing. Same teeth pattern. And what else? The brackets will bolt up. You got to run the shorter belt for the tensioner, so everything's going to be a little different. Then the AC pump, AC with the factory 04, or the 96 Explorer. This is all 96 with the plug-in. Right here is where we cut it. Then from the 2004 to the 96, we plugged it back in so it could plug back into the box. And then I made up a little airflow sensor right here. It's only a half a turn out with a water valve spigot, so I can adjust the air pressure just a little bit for the idle. And then into the fuel pump, you got to drop the dry shaft. We put a bigger pump in there with a return line system, but I used the original cap from the 04, took out the spring in there, the rod in there to interchange the pumps. The only 2 wires I cut in there was for the float for the fuel gauge. then resoldered them after I got all the main wires back in on the other cap. And I plugged everything back in, and the only 2 wires that were cut were those 2 wires for the float, and then resoldered them and shrink wrap tubed them, and I put a return line system in there for the fuel pressure regulator. Can go back in with the electronics so I can adjust it to 70 pounds of fuel pressure. And everything else will bolt right up in there, and the fan blade's off the 04 on the 96, so everything else is 04 except for the motor. 96, got the notch, electronic throttle plate, and I don't need the sensors here, and all the wiring's plugged back in. And I got 12-hole injectors in it for Jeep, and we ran all their fuel injectors, and I wanted to save gas mileage, so they worked out pretty good. And everything else bolted right back in. Good. And the muffler extensions I made up, one's a little bit longer than the other. We flared the ends. We had a muffler shop flare the ends, and then we put it right up to the manifolds. And then the other ring on the bottom is welded about 1 inch from the bottom, where the muffler gasket can slip in there, and then the original Y pipes can come up and clamp to that extension, so we can use all the original setups off the 04 onto the 96. And the wire harness is cupped in the back on the 04s. I unraveled it all, had to get it out of the tubes, move it where I needed it, stretch it all out where I needed it, and retubed all the wiring so everything would plug back in. And there you have it. So everything else is ready to go. And the power steering, I had to turn the power steering line, turn it, twist it up in there, turn it, and screw it back in with the 04 under the 96. I probably should have cut it. I should cut it somewhere and let it relax a little bit and put a fitting in there. I haven't done that yet, but that's what I did. I turned it, screwed it right back in. And everything else from the water pump or the exchange for the heat inside the cab is still all 04. I screwed the bracket back on and everything, and so everything's 04 with a 96 4.0 push rod. The computer board will line right up, and it's good to go. I forgot to mention that the NOx sensor is in line too off the 04 onto the 96. It's mounted up underneath the power, or right underneath the alternator in the back, in the front of the head. And you had to make up a bolt for it and everything, and so it'd be a complete bolt into the block with the NOx sensor, and it's all plugged in with the main wire harness off the 04 onto the 96. That's about it.